If you were to look at the auto news this morning, they will say GM chief economist says it's still sunny out. The message I want to give is, our economy has a lot of challenges, but compared to the rest of the world, it's doing very well. We're in the 8th year of a recovery, which you're beginning to push the edges of the longest period of recovery. We're approaching full employment. Yet, there's a lot of concern. People aren't really not convinced this recovery is as good. You know, I'll show in a couple charts. This has been a very slow and erratic recovery compared to history. In fact, one could say it's the slowest since World War II. You really have to go back briefly to the period around the Great Depression to find rates of growth this slow. But the longer this recovery has lasted, the more jobs we've created, the closer we are to full employment. And in fact, I was telling people that I was just up in northern Michigan for a big conference. Virtually every store, restaurant you went into had a help wanted sign. And in fact, one of the restaurant managers said he's going to close down early this year because he just can't get help. So, so that's where we are. In terms of auto sales, last year was an all-time record. There's some debate within the industry or analysts that cover the industry, but I remain convinced that we will have another record this year. And so far, we are running slightly ahead of last year's pace. So overall, I think, it's hard to explain to people that for all the complaints we hear, this economy ain't doing too bad. Now, as I said, if you look at compared to others, compared to Reagan recovery or, the economy has been very slow to come out of the recession. Part of it is that we had a big financial crisis. And virtually every country you look at, when they have a big financial crisis, it takes a while to recover because balance sheets have to be rebuilt. The focus becomes on rebuilding balance sheets rather than on new investments, and that slows things down. And one of the ongoing concerns I have, partially related to our tax laws, a lot of corporations are sitting on a lot of money. Cash holdings by corporations have never been this high. We at GM like to brag about our fortress balance sheets. But the fact is, what's good for one company is not necessarily good for the entire economy. Somebody has to start taking risks and investing rather than holding on to cash to avoid the type of problems we ran into during the Great Recession. And in particular, where the challenges have been in job creation, that job creation in this recovery has been about as slow as I can recall in any recovery. I mean, it's taken 7 years, and now we're finally hitting the level of jobs in the economy that we had in 2007. Now, the unemployment rate has dropped largely because of decline in labor force participation rates. It's across the board that the participation rates have dropped, and this is prime working age males. As you can see, overall there's been a decline, and it's been really severe within the African American community. And I think, we've heard and seen a lot of the violence around the country, but nobody's talking about this, that our local schools, the social structure is just not preparing African American young men to go into the labor force. And unless we address that, we've got a challenge going forward. But that's also an opportunity for the Republican side. Come up with creative solutions to bring this whole group of people back into the labor force. And by the way, I think raising the minimum wage to 15 would be disaster. If people are not hiring African American kids at 7.5, they certainly are not going to hire them at 15. So you will just make the problem worse, and you can go look at Italy, Spain, France. We've observed that over and over again, that as you raise the minimum wage to a level where people just won't hire people, young people have a tough time getting jobs. I mean, you look at a country like Spain, the unemployment rate for 16 to 25-year-olds is on the order of 40%. but they have a very high minimum wage. They all supposedly get a living wage, but unfortunately, if you don't have a job, living wage doesn't matter. So that's a real challenge for us, for the society. You know, you can't leave out that big a percent of the population out of the workforce. But that's what we've effectively done and are doing right now. So that's going to be my only political statement. The rest will be all economics.